Good morning or afternoon, players, gamers, and critters. I am Master Mimic, and welcome back to Roaring D20s, my show where I sit here and talk about everything D&D related. Now, the thing that I love about Dungeons & Dragons is that it can provide a varied level of experience for both players and dungeon masters or game masters alike. You know, some great, some not so much. But the experiences mostly derive from the storyteller, in this case, the GM. However, not more often than not, GMs will make mistakes. I mean, having been one for about 10 years, I can wholeheartedly say, yeah, it's a difficult job. And unfortunately, Unfortunately, when you have a bad GM, things in the adventure can just crumble away. It can go wrong in numerous ways. The thing is, what I'm trying to get at is a GM is the storyteller, but there are certain factors that need to go into how one runs their game that needs to be considered in order for an adventure to be considered good, or at the very least, fun. I mean, I don't care if your game has zero logic to it whatsoever, lore gets totally thrown out the door and whatnot. If it is fun, well then, let's go at it, I mean, I've been privy to plenty of GMs running games that the storyline just completely tanked. At least during I would say, by narrative terms, the second or third act. But when it tanked, it would still be fun. I would still be excited to jump into that game because, well, I was happy and I was enjoying myself and everyone else was enjoying themselves. So, but there are certain obstacles that GMs go through, and a lot of people, players and whatnot, have had to deal with. I would say, well, let's begin with one problem that some inexperienced GMs, or at worst, veteran GMs can run into, and that is the God complex. I mean, it's simply there. The GM literally gets caught up in this notion that they are the god of this world, that the players are these people in this adventure, and the GM has control over everything. Monsters, loot drops, NPCs, the weather, everything. They really get caught up in this, deification that they kind of lose track of what makes the game fun. And unfortunately, this has happened to me a few times. This can sometimes happen in the, some noticeable sequences of this is railroading. The GM has a story they want to tell, and they don't care what you do, or what you say, or what events you try desperately to alter. This is how the game in their mind is going to go. I mean, I've heard some pretty scary stories about, players, alright, I'll tell you guys one. So I was a part of an adventure where it was me, Graveyard Picnic, Little Batty, oh goodness, what was his name? I'm so sorry. We'll just call him Kai here. So, me, Graveyard Picnic, Little Batty, and Kai. The four of us were playing in a game that was heavily inspired by a rather popular fantasy series. I won't go into more details than that, but essentially this series, he decided to base the adventure after the events of the overall plot of that. So we would run into familiar locations maybe familiar characters, he said, but the problem was, well, I guess it wasn't really a problem. It was more of the thing was, though, none of us had ever read these books. None of us had ever learned anything about this narrative, about the characters or whatever, the lore. And deep down, I think this was on purpose, because this meant the GM could essentially toss the lore book out the window and just come up with whatever he wanted. Now, I know, like I just said, it doesn't matter if your story is garbage as long as it's fun. And that was the danger that he was facing, because if this game wasn't fun, there was nothing else for us to ride on. No story to engage us. And one of the things he decided to do also was to test us. So he had us play out of class, as he said it. He didn't want us to play our usual, go-to classes. He wanted us to challenge ourselves a little bit, both as players and as characters. So, for example, I played a character who was more of a non-combatant, little baddie, who usually plays as magic users, went with someone who was more of a front-end fighter, and just so on and so forth. I honestly don't remember who Graveyard Picnic's character was, but I know Kai wanted to play a paladin. But this is where things started to go bad. Because the GM had a set adventure. He had his notes in front of him. He needed us to go from point A to point B, but he had a very fixed idea of how he wanted to get there. And hell or high water, he was going to do that. We were going to have to do that. So Kai's character ended up becoming a servant of the Dark Lord, where essentially he'd be fed information from the, quote, Dark Lord on ways to basically how to sabotage us from the inside out. The gimmick was he was an anti-paladin, but he was disguised as a paladin. Before you people who are the rule lawyers go, hey, that's not fair, you can't do that. Well, GM said it was okay, so, we just kind of had to shrug and go with it. Anyways, so this anti-paladin paladin masqueraded as this, virtuous crusader in order to help us on our quest. Okay, what was this quest? Save the princess from the evil cult. Ha. I know. Now, just me saying that makes me cringe. I mean, this is more of a personal, irk, because having now read the series that this adventure was based on, I realized just how, underwhelming this adventure was. But anyway, so the four of us took on the quest to save this princess, and we were on a time clock because we weren't the only mercenaries out looking for this woman. So at that point, some of you might say, oh, well, then were there any mercenaries, were there a rival party we would run into, kind of like a Gary versus Ash, or I guess more Red versus Blue, double reference, where we would get to a location and these guys would have beaten us there, or, we're stealing our thunder, we would have to maybe fight them a couple of times. No, these other mercenaries actually never ever showed up, which I thought was kind of a shame, because, I mean, especially for a little baddie's character who, let's just say she knows how to make a flamboyant fighter, and it was simply incredible. So we took this quest, and it was very apparent. I mean, he told us before the adventure began this was going to be heavily player choice driven. Essentially, whatever decisions we made throughout the game was going to affect the ending. It's easy to shrug and say, well, yeah, that's a Dungeons and Dragons game, that can happen anywhere, but this was a little bit different because this GM was known for having a very, like, he was very straightforward with his stories. We get the quest, we go to the dungeon, we beat the bad guy. The only great decisions we would ever make is either how we beat the bad guy or what we do with the all-powerful artifact that we retrieved for the forlorn villagers. But this was something surprising. This was going to be a challenge for both us and him, because he had to keep in mind that he was telling the story based around our decisions. Unfortunately, I want to say it was by the second adventure. Well, I mean, heck, even earlier if you factor in the anti-paladin. But it became fairly apparent that this adventure was not going to go this way. First, this anti-paladin wasn't the saboteur that the Dark Lord may have been wanting, and that was more because Kai, I think, felt kind of uncomfortable taking this role, because he wanted to hang out, he wanted to have fun with us, and well, he couldn't. He had to constantly wait for opportunities to kind of screw us over. And the thing was, as players, we knew this. Obviously, player knowledge versus character knowledge. But the problem we had with this was my character was an investigator. I kind of modeled him after the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, with a little bit of dabbling in with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because he could take these mutagens that would give him certain buffs. And the thing was, so my character, he is inquisitive. So when, for example, when we're facing down a guard who knows how to get into the castle where we need to, get into, when the paladin is the first one to mention torture as a way for us to break him, my character is going to jump on that as this is not paladin behavior, this is not right. Unfortunately, every time I would try to, press on this, I got you now, because my character knows that's not the GM would usually throw out some arbitrary reason why it was okay for a paladin, a holy crusader of the light and good and peace and protector of the innocent, to imply that torturing this innocent man might be the best way for us to achieve our goals. And it got to a point where I was prodding so much, because again, my character, I played him like Sherlock Holmes. The instant he hears an inaccuracy, the instant he hears, a detail that doesn't quite sound right, he's gonna press that. And it got to where the GM then stonewalled me by essentially accusing me of metagaming. And that was kind of the moment I realized where this game really was. This wasn't a player-driven game. This was player-driven in name only. Because we could make decisions, but that's where Kai's paladin came in. Because whatever decisions we made, he was encouraged to sabotage us, and that's just not fun. It ultimately, I would say, the biggest betrayal, I would say, was at some point in the later adventure, we were thrown at a Allosaurus. Now, Little Batty and Graveyard Picnic, those two are the biggest Jurassic Park fans I know. I would say Graveyard Picnic even more so. So the fact that a dinosaur was thrown at us as an enemy should have factored in the GM's mentality that this thing might not actually die, but in fact might actually become our pet. And that was our goal, was we weren't trying to kill this thing, we wanted to tame it. And so it took a while, it took a liberal use of chains and my own character's brilliant, bardic music, which is actually funny because I actually had no levels in Bard, but I had a high perform. So I was able to lull this beast into a sense of security and calm, and we ended up finally being able to restrain this beast and began to domesticate it. And suddenly the GM shot a text to Kai, and I just remember Kai just nodding to him, and the GM then proclaiming that while our backs are turned, Kai walked up to the dinosaur and plunged his greatsword into its carotid artery, making it start to gush out bleeding, and he asked us, okay, what do you do? Now, I have been privy to minigames, but very few times have I been a part of what I will call a player mutiny. Because Little Batty, I love her to death. She is in her own way like this fiery little spitfire. If something isn't right and she knows it, she will go on the defensive and she will defend herself. Because dag nabbit, that is her dinosaur. So the moment this paladin plunged his blade into the dinosaur's throat, I knew she wasn't going to like it. But then in comes Graveyard Picnic, the most docile, most, go with the flow player I've ever known. And he is just as fiery as she is, as they very broadly proclaimed their resistance and their detest of this decision. And it was so fiery that eventually the GM actually had to retcon what he had said, because at that point he realized the game was in danger of losing half the party, because he knew if these players left, there was no way I was going to play without Little Batty, and obviously Kai wasn't going to be able to lead the party on his own. So he retconned this decision and then proceeded to throw a villain at us that we had previously encountered. I'm going to actually skip on that initial story because, this video is already getting pretty long, and I don't really want to, keep you guys up all night or day, whichever. But anyway, so this guy, we kind of had our own little bone to pick with him because, essentially, he captured us, we escaped, and we told the guards where his bandit camp was, and the Royal Army just steamrolled this guy and his army. And this guy comes back to get revenge on us, but now he's made a pact with the Dark Lord, so now he's in command of dire wolves and normal wolves, and I believe he was riding a warg, and we had to face him down. How at the beginning of the game we were, but as captives, but now we were fighting him on even ground. If by even ground you mean we were clearly in the advantage, because we had a freaking dinosaur. And yes, our dinosaur, which we lovingly named Cabbage, because he was green, just devoured and slaughtered these wolves, with reckless abandon. The paladin was there to drive his blade into these dire wolves because, he had to be, he couldn't just say, oh no, I can't kill them, and, blow his cover, so he had to help us. Meanwhile, the three of us, Graveyard Picnic, Little Batty, and myself, teamed up on the main guy himself. This guy did not last 3 rounds. He was down for the count. And my guy actually ended up doing the killing blow, which was very satisfying to me because this was an NPC I hated both in and out of game. So we were victorious, and we were all happy. Yes, we did it! We beat this guy, the complete reversal of how things were at the beginning of the adventure. Then we look over at the GM, and he was the only one among us who wasn't smiling. He then proceeded to explain that if it wasn't for Cabbage, the adventure would have been, we might have lost that battle if not for Cabbage. Which was not the case at all. I mean, wolves are wolves, and, dire wolves are dire wolves, but when you have a high-level paladin in full-plate armor a shield and a big sword that does a lot of damage, yeah, these things aren't going to last very long. And when it's 3 of us, I believe we were at like level 6, and this guy was level 10. So, yeah, 3 level 6s against a level 10 guy. We put him down pretty dang quick. But it was at that. But the thing is that was how it was with this game. Was there was a certain god complex lingering in the GM. He didn't like when we made decisions that took him by surprise, or maybe it made him feel insignificant or something. Like he started to feel like it was him versus us. Gods among men, or gods versus men kind of thing. But I tried to make it apparent that I wasn't trying. None of us were trying to sabotage this game. We were just having fun. But there were moments where he would just place us on a track and have us go from set piece to set piece, and no matter what outcome, we were going to go into the next set piece whether or not we liked it. I mean, when we are in the middle of a city being besieged by demons, the first thing we're going to want to do is try to save as many as we can. We weren't evil characters. Heck, I think the lowest we were was like chaotic neutral, or okay, maybe the paladin's case he was, I think he was neutral evil, whatever. But we wanted to save people. We wanted to be heroes, but he kind of fast-tracked us out of the city on our mounts and had us continue the adventure while leaving the city to its fate. Now, my character is lawful neutral, but again, he's kind of based off the Sherlock Holmes character, so he's not about to leave innocents to die, especially if he has the power to save them. So, it kind of hurt our, it kind of hurt our, our immersion, because it didn't feel like our decisions mattered. It was just, it kind of felt like, okay, I know this is a very old reference, but it felt like Mass Effect 3, where we had the pretense that all of our decisions was going to lead up to something, only for us to basically be given, a very this way or that way ending, and it really sucks, but that's kind of how it went. Another issue that some bad GMs are notorious for is outside drama. I have been a part of this as well. Me and a friend of mine, there was a time where he and I just, for some reason, we just didn't get along. And, I mean, we've patched things up since, thank God. But he and I were just, even though we did not seem to get along, we still attended each other's game nights. And it seemed like whenever he was GM, and I will admit, whenever I was GM, the other guy tended to get the shaft in a lot of ways, Like, this character, this player might be given a enchanted sword that gives him a +3 to his attack, while my character is given a wand that I can't even use, Now, again, this was me in the past, so yes, I was vindictive, and I did bring outside drama into the game. And it's one of those things that I'm not proud of, but obviously I've learned from it. But that's just what I mean, though. Like, sometimes when you have a vendetta against a person outside of the game, it typically isn't a good idea to bring that into the game, because consciously or not, you are going to try and punish them, let's see. Another issue that some GMs have is NPCs that take over the story. Now, this can be both a bane and a boon. What I mean is, sometimes you have a story that is a fetch quest, or not fetch, it's a escort mission, where you need to bring the important guy to the destination and trying to keep him alive in the meantime. That's fine. Except, sometimes this guy becomes a little too important. I have been the player of a game where basically we were tasked with defeating this demon, but the only weapon that could destroy him was found in this lost civilization that we needed to unearth, And we were on a time clock, This demon wasn't going to sit on its claws and let us, find the means of its destruction. But thankfully, it was focused on this other conflict that it gave us some time to go and find this artifact. During this mission, though, we encountered a character, an NPC, who had the artifact, but proclaimed that they were the only ones who could use it, and that they were personally, literally, they were personally destined to one day defeat the great demon. So, our mission from there then on was to get this character to the demon so that they can kill it. But the problem was, it kind of felt like, at that point, it wasn't our adventure. We were the supporting cast, and they were now the protagonist, And we were, let's say we were ne'er-do-wells, so we ended up turning on this person, and we took the artifact ourselves, and granted, there was a lot of pain that came from using that weapon against the demon, but, whatever. But the thing is this character became too important, and I kind of saw where the GM was going with it, but it alienated the rest of us. It made the rest of us feel like we weren't important to the game anymore. It was just this person, even though this person didn't actually have much of a vendetta against the demon, while every one of us had a bone to pick with him. So it felt really odd for us. Then Little Baddie ran a game where it was the opposite, where we had to escort an NPC who was he was essentially the crown prince of this kingdom, whose younger twin brother, managed to usurp him, cripple him, and it was only by luck and the help of the former captain of the guard that this crown prince was able to escape. He then runs to us, and granted, we're also ne'er-do-wells, just like in the previous adventure, but here, one of my characters actually had ties with that kingdom. He was born there in an orphanage, and all of us ended up having different reasons of why we wanted to help this guy, and it was cool. It was, we all felt important in this guy's eyes, and again, now that it's easy because you could say, well, the trap that Little Baddie was facing was having this guy be so important that, again, the rest of us just ended up being co-conspirators in this guy's rebellion, while he himself was the great rebel leader leading his people against the tyrant. That wasn't the case. The way that Little Baddie did it was having this character, the closer we got to his kingdom, he got more and more nervous, to the point where he started drinking more, so therefore he was drunk and started getting into shenanigans, forcing us to keep an eye on him. He started freezing up during combat, but the way that he went about it wasn't to the point where he was a burden. It was more of, it was realistic, and we had to find out he became an obstacle, but not one that was like hitting a brick wall. I had my fighter barbarian character, smack the crap out of him a few times, train him in combat, doing what he could to boost his confidence. And even when we reached the kingdom, it was so clear this guy, the Crown Prince, was still shaking in his boots, but he knew at that point, he had that resolve of, I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this for my people. See, if in that previous adventure I mentioned, if the person with the artifact was, well, lesser. I mean, for one, if they weren't the only person who had the weapon, or could use the weapon effectively, it wouldn't have felt so much like like a Mary Sue kind of thing. We were just along for the ride to help them in their adventure. If it would have been something more along the lines of this person was literally chosen, like Hunger Games style, to face this demon, like the demon's appearance coincides with this prophecy, maybe like every 1,000 years he emerges from his tomb and one of these warriors has to face him. Well, the thing would be, maybe this guy's entire village was slaughtered or something, and he was the last one, but the thing was, maybe he was the town drunk, or maybe he was the stable boy, the one person who would not last in a fight against this demon, and our goal from there on was to protect him, but also get him ready for this fight. This would have done well. I mean, again, we were morally ambiguous, mortally challenged people. But if this guy had, or if they had tried to maybe work with us than through us, it would have been a lot more interesting. It would have been a lot more fun. Another obstacle that bad GMs tend to put for players, and this one is just straight up vindictive, and I know I've been saying that a lot, but vindictive and sadistic, forcing rerolls, or I'll say crit confirmations. For those who don't know what a crit confirmation is, it is a system in Pathfinder where when you roll a natural 20, you need to roll again to confirm that critical. Obviously, as soon as I read this, I told my players straight out, that's not how I'm going to do it. If you roll a 20, you roll a 20. And for a while, that's how my game group played. If you rolled a natural 20, congratulations, you critted. You didn't have to confirm it. Because when you confirm it, it kind of, nothing is going to kill a mood around the table, sour someone's mood more. If you roll a natural 20, and then you go to roll again, you roll a 1. So, congratulations, you don't crit on him, you don't earn that 20. It's like, it was BS. But I have had a GM who, he was a part of my group for a little while, and he knew the way we played, and he even ran several adventures where he ran with this, a 20 is a 20 is basically the motto here, that a 20 is a 20. But then when we started playing more, I would say he started to get a little bit more sour with us. I'm not exactly quite sure where this dip in his attitude went, but it got to where it was again that classic case of it became him versus us. And he began out of nowhere whenever, for example, I would roll a natural 20, and then he would just look at me in the face, and he would just tell me, roll to confirm. Again, if this was the first natural 20 I rolled in this game, I would be, okay, I guess that's the system we're doing. I mean, it's not very cool because he didn't tell us that, but whatever. No. This was within the third session, many criticals later, that he tells me to confirm this critical. This was done purely out of spite. Purely because he didn't want me to succeed at this move. And it just so happened the dice gods shined their light on me, because not only did I confirm that critical with another natural 20, but then when he told me to confirm that critical, I rolled yet another 20, and then when he told me to confirm that, I rolled a 19, therefore confirming the heck out of that triple critical. So that times 2 damage jumped up to a times 6. So I didn't just succeed, I dominated. And it was at that point where it became apparent, if he didn't want you to have that critical, he would force a crit confirmation on you. And he didn't just do this with me either. He would do this to other players, and it was aggravating, to say the least. A lot of us did not like this. And we tried telling him, look, man, if you want us to confirm our crits, okay, but be consistent with it. Don't just pull it out of your butt whenever you want to, stab us in the back. And he said that he was doing it for plot convenience. For plot convenience for freaking what? So this, and then I had another GM. Actually, I want to say it was during my it was during that adventure, the one with my investigator and the paladin and all that, where the GM had a really bad habit of negating natural 20s. See, he was a firm believer that a natural 20 does not mean an immediate success. Like, if you're trying to convince the king to relinquish his throne and you roll a natural 20 to diplomacy, he's not going to just hand you his crown, all right, everyone, dynasty over. I'm going to go live my life as a common peasant. It's not going to happen. So, if anything, you might make a good argument that, okay, well, this is something I might mull over, but, he's not going to just, fine, okay, kingdom's yours, I have no problems with this. No problems at all. But the problem was the GM got to where natural 20s on skill checks didn't work, period. In fact, he would treat them as if they were either a modified 20 or that we didn't roll anything at all. Like, for example, we're in this dark, foreboding city where he's telling us that the instant we set foot within its parameters, we feel this malicious presence watching our every move from the deepest, darkest shadows. So little Batty rolls perception to see if she can at least catch a glimpse at what kind of entity or entities are watching us. She rolled, and it came up as a natural 20. We all rejoiced. Yes! She was so excited. I was so excited. And the GM just says, you get this feeling that you're being watched. Yeah, like nothing happened. Like she had never rolled, or that she didn't roll high enough. And to see the fury in her face, I thought she was going to plant one on this guy, but thankfully it didn't come to that. But but that's what I mean, though. And this goes even for forcing rerolls, where a GM on the spot will give you disadvantage after you rolled. Awesome, I rolled a natural 20, that's so cool, alright. Roll again with disadvantage. Like that. Like, what does that mean? Well, why do I have disadvantage all of a sudden? You didn't tell me that, This is possibly the worst thing you can do to your players. One of the things that will just destroy not only your integrity, but also the fun and joy that these players have for your game. Because at that point on, they're not going to want to come back. When you take away one of the greatest triumphs in Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, any role-playing game, which is rolling that natural 20, doesn't matter if it's in combat, out of combat, whatever, when you see that 20 come up, it is in your DNA to shout with joy, throw your fist in the air, and holler in triumph. So for a GM to take that away just feels sick. It feels malicious. You don't want to go back to playing that, because one of the great joys of D&D is gone. Now it's just, essentially it's almost like it puts you at their mercy. And that is the worst feeling a player should have, being at the mercy of the GM. Because again, it's not about them versus us. It is about all of us playing the game and just having fun. If a player dies in the process, it's just the roll of the dice. It's just the decisions that were made. GMs can be, you can be tough on players, they're there are going to be battles that will be losing battles. And it is okay for players to lose. But it is the way, there's a certain balance you have to strike there, you know? A difficult encounter, there's a difference between a difficult encounter and an unfair encounter. You know, when you have a bandit king throw a horde of bandits at you, and the spellcasters, up to that point, knowing full well there's a villain coming up, are throwing their spells this way and that, and then as soon as you enter combat, they have like 1 second level spell, 2 first level spells left, and they then turn on the GM and say, hey, that wasn't fair. Well, no. You made that difficult on yourself. I was just playing the game. I'm not going to stop you from casting spells, but I'm also not going to show mercy, you know? But that's different compared to we bring down the Allosaurus and we tame it only for the Dark Lord's minion to plunge a blade into its artery, and the GM with a smile tells us this. You know, there's a very delicate balance there that GMs need to walk. But some, that line is a little bit easier to follow than others. And like I said, just because GMs make mistakes, you know, I'm not saying people who force crit confirmations, people who bring outside drama, people who have a god complex, people who railroad games, I'm not saying that these are bad GMs in the same way that they're bad people. Because, again, I have made mistakes too, you know? I have brought outside drama into a game. I have railroaded people before. I have felt this feeling that it was me versus them. But again, this is from over a decade of playing Dungeons & Dragons. Now I am a bit wiser, but even now, I know I have a lot more to learn. You know, not everyone can be the saintly Matthew Mercer. I'm just kidding. But what I'm trying to get at is, I'm not saying these are bad people. And if these people are if what I've described are people sound like people in your groups, again, they're, in my experience at least, most of the time, they're not bad people. They're just, to quote South Park, they're just ignorant. So, like I said, all GMs will make mistakes. Even the saintly Matthew Mercer has made mistakes. And the only way to determine whether or not these GMs improve and whether or not they go from being a GM to a bad GM depends on if they learn from these mistakes. If they realize that they are bringing outside drama into the game and they decide, okay, you know what, I gotta play it fair, that doesn't make them a bad GM. If the GM realizes, oh my god, I've been thinking myself as this all-powerful deity and I've been taking all the player decisions away from them, that doesn't make them a bad GM. If they realize, oh my god, I've put them on the the RPG Express and they need to hop off this track, that's not a bad GM. Like I said, GMs come in all shapes and forms. But it's the way that we learn from our mistakes that forms the quality of our work and honestly how much fun our players have with our games. And well, this video is already kind of long, so I will call it for now. Thank you all for listening. I've been Master Mimic, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Have a good one.